Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 301 or 301. Wow, it feels really, really strange to say 300 at the beginning of a Random Encounter episode. And the reason why I'm doing that is we are just off episode 300. So if you downloaded the last episode, it was a little bit different. We did a draft to the future where me and Solosi and Mike and Hillary, we kind of made predictions about what we think the video game scene is going to look like 4 years from now when we record Random Encounter 400. We had a really, really good time with that episode, and I think there was some interesting conversations in there. But I am, after the mountain of news from not E3 and then the Nintendo Direct and then the draft episode, I am absolutely delighted to be doing an episode of Random Encounter where I just get to talk about two games again. So joining me today to talk about two games are Abe.
Hello, V Gates. That's hello, by the way.
That'll make sense in a second.
Yeah.
Yes, I figured. And Neal.
Hey.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump straight in because ignoring the last 3 episodes of Random Encounter being like a crazy, crazy time, the last 3 weeks of the world in general and news and everything has also been a whirlwind of exhaustion and stress and anxiety. And I think that we all deserve a vacation from that. And a beautiful, beautiful place to vacation is, I'd say, Hinterberg, Austria. Beautiful, beautiful spot. And they've made a video game about it, believe it or not, haven't they, Abe?
They have.
They may have taken some artistic license.
Yeah, slightly.
Slightly. I expect that if you go to the actual Hinterberg, that you're probably not going to get the exact experience in the game, but I'm sure it'll be somewhat similar, right?
I expect there's probably more skiing there than dungeons, but I mean, who knows? I mean, the future is open, right?
Yep. If this game is a massive success, who knows? They might revamp the entire place. So the game is Dungeons of Hinterberg, and it is I guess it pulls inspiration from a number of different genres, but I suspect the main one is probably it's a Zelda-like. And it's gotten some pretty good buzz the last few days. Abe, you gave it an 83, and you also wrote an impression piece for it, a preview a few weeks ago. It was pretty positive. So before we jump into the review, I'm just curious, did the experience that you had with the game live up to the promise that you felt in the preview?
I think so. So when I played the demo, it was set in a snowy area with where you had a hoverboard, which essentially functioned as a snowboard. So I was expecting the whole game to be like that. It seemed like it was going for kind of a ski lodge sort of experience there, but it turned out to be a lot more than that, much more varied than I was expecting it to be. So I'd say it kind of in some ways it exceeded my expectations. But it was pretty much all the good things I liked about the demo, they were present in the actual game too.
Cool. The basic idea of this game, it's an interesting one, actually, rather than, going to save the world or you're given a quest. The main character here just wants to go on vacation. So she visits the Austrian town of Hinterberg, and there are dungeons. And she discovers that she is very, very good at slaying monsters and presumably solving some rather obscure puzzles. So this game is really based around the idea of it being a vacation getaway. You are getting away from your life. You are, in a weird way, relaxing. And in your review, you talk a lot about how Dungeons of Hinterberg is basically it's like a vacation getaway in a lot of ways. And more specifically, it's a vacation getaway that actually reflects some parts of modern gaming culture. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
So I think it broadly looks at the concept of like recreation, and the idea of getting away and things we usually do on ideal vacations. And I think it does kind of tie that to video games by paying homage to a lot of different types of video games and highlighting the importance of play in our lives. And so I think it does kind of tie video games to being sort of kind of like a mini vacation, possibly. And that's something that I think we've talked about, and certainly if you play games like Zelda, that you can dig into like really deeply. it is a little bit of an escape from you know daily life sometimes.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean that's the reality of games that have incredible environmental design. It often feels like you're visiting this impossible fantasy world. Um, and that is very much one aspect of games. I mean, you mentioned Zelda. This is a Zelda like in terms of a lot of its mechanics, but it also pulls inspiration from the Persona games, a little bit from Nier. Uh, let's just focus on the Zelda like style elements first. Can you elaborate on some of them? How is this game like Zelda? How does it play like Zelda?
Well, like I think the, Zelda like isn't like something that we really talk about. like, um, I feel like Sony always had its. They always try to have their Zelda-ish style franchise. I never played Dark Cloud.
Horizon,
That
for
was
example. Yeah.
yeah. The other one I was going to say was Horizon. I think
Yeah.
Horizon it shares a lot of elements with Zelda, but I wouldn't say it's like directly like a Zelda-ish style game. Um, but like the style of the fighting and the way the dungeons are laid out definitely feel like they're definitely doing a very 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 close to Zelda sort of ideas.
Yeah, Zelda has been an evolving concept, especially in the last few years with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom being a much more non-linear Zelda in terms of there are a few dungeons, but they're less linear than the previous games. Previous Zelda games, since the very beginning, tend to go. There's a series of anywhere from 8 to 14 dungeons in a variety of worlds, sometimes a light world, sometimes a dark world. You visit them. There is a item inside that dungeon that allows you to progress inside that dungeon and then progress outside in the world to be able to access new tools, new areas, and of course, new dungeons. And you just continue this until eventually you find yourself facing a giant pig. Uh, does this game follow that to an extent? Because I mean, you do have, I mean, dungeons, quote unquote. Like, can you face the dungeons in any order, or do you need to do a linear line of dungeons to get items to get access to the future ones?
So yeah, it does. It sort of follows a Zelda formula, but it's I think that's kind of where the Persona aspect comes into it too. Like, the game keeps track of how many days you've been playing. And I'm pretty sure that some dungeons aren't going to open until you reach a specific day in the game. So much like,
Mm.
much how the story progresses in Persona, where certain events happen on a certain date. But there are also elements where you do have to kind of explore a little bit and search off the beaten path to find certain dungeons, and so that's it is little bit of a mishmash of Zelda style game, Zelda style exploration, and the Persona sort of calendar sort of system. I would say like the Zelda elements are like it kind of draws from a lot of the 3D Zeldas. So I think the dungeons feel a lot more like, well, in terms of their scope, the dungeons feel a lot more like something from Ocarina of Time. But the puzzles feel a lot more like
Mm.
they're from Breath of the Wild. So I think it draws from probably
Oh.
a range of Zelda games, mostly the 3D Zelda ones.
In terms of the Persona parts of the game, I guess, what parts does it pull from? I'm assuming that mainly social mechanics.
Yeah, I think they literally call them social links also, which is what they were called in Persona as well. So like much like
Yeah,
in
that's
Persona,
pretty much a 1-to-1 right there.
yeah. So much like in Persona, yeah. So during the day, you go and explore the areas that have the dungeons in them. You might go in a dungeon, or you might. There's also other activities such as well, it's pretty much stopping to take in the scenery for the day, which
Mm.
gives you certain boosts. Then in the evening, uh, you can choose who Luis is going to hang out with. So, and the depending on who you hang out with, they give you different bonuses, and you can start your relationship with each character and progress them, most of them to level 3. Um, but that means that you had to hang out with them on subsequent days. So you're developing relationships with these characters. So and in that way, yeah, it's very much like Persona.
Presumably, this is very similar to going out and hitting the slopes during the daytime and then coming back to the lodge at night and sipping some hot chocolate with some folks.
Yeah, that's pretty much the idea, I think. Yeah.
When I was talking about the dungeons a minute ago and how in Zelda dungeons are essentially item locked, like in order to get to the next dungeon, you often need the item from the previous dungeon. In this game, it sounds like a similar system is in place, but using area specific magic that allows you to essentially get into these areas. What kind of magic spells are we talking about, and how are these magic spells used to create essentially puzzles?
So in that way, it's kind of in that way, Dungeons of Hinterberg is kind of like the reverse of Zelda. At the beginning of each area, it gives you 2 spells that you're going to have for the entire area and for all the dungeons in that area. And you had to come up with creative ways to use those spells to solve the puzzles. So in each area, you're only going to have 2 spells. It's just that you have to learn how to use them in a variety of ways. One of the things that I thought was interesting was that those spells that you use to explore on the in the overworld, you can also use them in combat. You also have like combat specific abilities, but it's interesting that it also allows you it allows you to use these spells in like a lot of different ways. So you use them in combat and you use them to explore.
Hmm.
So like in the first area that you go to, so you have the 2 spells you get are one that generates a hard metal ball, um, and then the other one that shoots a sort of a grappling hook sort of thing that you can use to then pull specific items. So you might have to use the metal ball to press a switch that's on the other side of a wall that you can't reach by yourself. That'd be a simple sort of thing that you can do with it. I think the game gets a lot more creative with the puzzles as it goes.
Yeah, you mentioned that some of the puzzles, you very much enjoy some of the puzzles, the basic logic puzzles, but you also mentioned that there are some fairly janky solutions to some of them.
So there was it was pretty specific. There was one specific magic power that I thought had a little bit janky stuff sometimes. And then, so in another one of the areas, you have this kind of a tornado sort of thing that you can create with your spell, and you can use that to you can move that far away from you to manipulate objects like that are kind of farther away from you. But you can also, if you move the tornado to yourself, then you can ride it, um,
Mhm.
and you use that to reach higher places, sort of. And I just thought that was a little bit janky. um,
Yeah.
I like the I can't really describe it, but the kind of the way there's like platform areas that are kind of like nets, so you kind of have to move yourself onto the net. I thought that was a little silly, but um, that's kind of the exception, though. For the most part, I just thought they're all pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, you obviously you get these various magical spells. You can use them both as tools and to solve puzzles, but also for combat. How does the combat system evolve throughout the game? Because in not necessarily in Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but in previous Zelda games, combat was, I mean, it wasn't static. You had lots of tools, but it was basically you got sword, hit thing with sword, and you could get various upgrades to sword to make sword stronger. Is that what we're looking at here, where it's pretty much just a one tool and you can use the other tools as accents, or does the combat system evolve throughout?
Yeah, combat is an area where it's a little bit it's slightly different from Zelda, but also kind of similar. Um, like in Zelda, like the combat is very open. Like you can run up to an enemy and hit them and then run away, and run completely away from them if you want to. In this game, the combat sequences are scripted. So if you go
Mhm.
into a certain area,
Oh,
it's gonna lock you out of leaving. You can't even like escaping isn't an option, and
a little
so
bit like
you
Okami
just
then.
gotta. I haven't played Okami, so
I think
sure.
Abe, I think you'd like Okami. It's but like in Okami, when you fight an enemy, you kind of end up in like it's like a ring of sorts. It's like an
Yeah.
arena.
Okay, so that's what they're doing here. Yeah. So maybe the Dungeons of Hinterberg developers also were drawing from Okami in that case. Yeah, it's like a ring, and you had to defeat all the enemies in the ring before you can move on. or die. I guess that's also another option, but not preferable.
I'm kind of wondering whether or not the people who are angry when you can't pet the dog in a game would be angry at Okami because you are the dog.
Uh,
Can you
can't
does
pet
petting
yourself.
yourself count as petting the dog, or
uh,
is that getting just weird? I guess okay. So all the combat encounters are scripted. I imagine that includes bosses.
yeah, the bosses are pretty neat too.
Are there puzzle solving elements to the bosses as well? Because again, that's something in Zelda where the item that's required in a dungeon is usually required to beat that boss, and each boss is technically a puzzle in itself. Is that sort of the same thing here?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same thing. They are also very puzzly. Yeah, there's usually a specific way to defeat the boss, but it takes you have to figure that out. And that's part of what makes it interesting is figuring out what the secret is. Though
Hmm.
once you figure it out, oh, I need to use this spell to do this. I mean, then they're pretty easy, but still impressive designs and still pretty memorable. There was one that seemed like it was lifted pretty directly from Dark Souls. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, it seems like the game's influences are pretty widespread, and they definitely did draw from a lot of different styles of games. So that's another cool.
It's interesting to me the way this game is handling the mixture of fantasy and the real world. Because in games like Zelda or Okami, they do take place in essentially fantasy worlds. In the case of Zelda, Hyrule. In the case of Okami, a fictional fantasy version of Japan. Here, we're faced with similar game mechanics and similar conventions, but I mean, it's modern day Austria. We're in a fantasy tinged world, but it very much is the real world. How does the game's narrative play with that idea?
Um, it does a little bit. It very much feels like you're rooted in the real world, but then something weird happened, and that's dungeons appearing.
Hmm.
But otherwise, it pretty much feels like modern day. I mean, I haven't been to Austria, but it feels like a modern day environment, something that you'd expect to find at like a vacation resort.
So,
Um,
for all we know, Austria is actually like this because I've never been to Austria either. Neal, have you been to Austria before?
No, I have not. Closest I ever came was elementary school ski trip to Switzerland because I was living in the Netherlands at the time.
Do they have fantasy dungeons in the Netherlands or Switzerland? That might give us a clue whether or not this is accurate.
Unfortunately, no, but we were kids with wild imaginations, and anywhere was accessible with a bicycle, so we had all kinds of pretend adventures.
Okay, so to the best of our combined knowledge, Austria is actually like this, and there are fantasy dungeons.
I can't say otherwise. Yeah.
We can't say otherwise. To the best of our knowledge and experience, this is actually what Austria is like. If anyone out there lives in Austria and wishes to give a rebuttal to this or confirm our theory, please write in.
Please tell us. Yeah, that'd
See,
be great. I love that.
absolutely. See, I really like this because I guess this is also, you mentioned the Persona comparison early on. I really like when there is a real world place and it's grounded in a world that we would recognize, but then fantasy elements start intruding on that, either organically, like, oh, they've always been here, or as a foreign influence starting to push its way into our world. It makes for a very relatable setting, I think. And here, I mean, I don't know how you feel about it. I've always really, really liked that.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the Persona games are great because because so many of the things you do there are things that you can actually do if you go to Tokyo or
They're
anywhere in
Japan
Japan.
simulators,
Yeah,
very similar to Like a Dragon.
or like a dragon. Yeah. So like I haven't I have not been to Austria, so I don't know if there's just people running around in goat masks all the time, or you know.
I thought we were in agreement that there were, but we'll get past that.
Right. Well, the dungeons specifically are a new phenomenon to the world. Not just Hinterberg. There are also, this might be a light spoiler, but it's also hinted that there are other dungeons in other parts of the world. So,
Oh,
and it's hinted that the dungeons in, I believe it's London, there's only like 5 of them. So,
oh,
in Dungeons of Hinterberg, there's 25. So, that certainly seems to be potential DLC material. Dungeons of London. I
Dungeons of
suspect
London.
maybe
Maybe they want to. Maybe they want to stick with ski resorts. If they come to Canada, they could do Dungeons of Banff.
that's a good name actually, just by itself. Even if even if it has nothing to do with this.
I've always firmly believed that Banff sounds like the name of an RPG village. It sounds like a starting village, like this random, like this, this boy and his childhood friend come from the village of Banff. It just sounds very 16-bit RPG to me. Anyway, but ignoring that.
Yeah.
Ignoring that. The game, so let me put it this way. The main character comes to Hinterberg. Do they expect dungeons or do they expect a ski vacation, essentially?
Oh, no, it's known. Like, the dungeons are kind of the new trend in vacationing in this world. So, yeah, it's not totally clear how... Well, I think in the game that it says that the dungeons have been there for about 3 years, so that's, enough time to build an industry around it. And it's become it's become the big thing in the world. So you find like social media influencers there. You find professional slayers who are making their brand off of slaying in this particular dungeon area in Hinterberg. So yeah,
it makes me uncomfortable how accurate all of that sounds if it actually happened.
So it's really fleshed out as a very modern world. Yes. You could even say that possibly Louisa is a fan of the retro 90s thing going on, because she has the teal puffy jacket that all the cool kids had in the 90s. Not me, but the cool kid in my class definitely had that teal jacket. So
Oh yeah, that's a nice jacket.
Yeah.
Well, nice in quotations. Nice if it's your sort of thing. Because the game is, it sounds like it, I'm assuming based on influencer culture and things like that, the game does have a few things to say about on social commentary. For example, I think I read into your review there was some commentary on tourism and its impact on local communities.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into that too deeply because that's getting into spoiler territory a little bit. But yeah, you do among the people that you make friends with in Hinterberg are local residents who were there before the dungeons popped up. So before it became like a major tourist town. So it shows that the people there don't particularly like having they don't like their small quaint village being turned into a big resort town with big businesses moving in to make their money off of the tourists. I do live in a tourist town that was very touristy before I was here. I don't mind it personally.
Oh, what town do you live in, Abe? What small hamlet of tourism do you inhabit?
Yeah, that'd be Las Vegas, Nevada. There was a time where it was much smaller than it is now, in terms of the local population. But now it's a little bit bigger. The reputation preceded the population, though. So
clearly, yes. I remember I watched a while back, I think it was a Wendover production video about the impact of ski resorts on local economies. Fascinating video, and I imagine that this is somewhat similar to that.
Yeah.
Tourism is an interesting business. It's incredibly lucrative for local communities, but can also be incredibly destructive. As we're seeing in Barcelona right now, there's a massive outcry against tourists in Barcelona because of rising property values and other things. And some locals are spraying tourists with water guns as a form of protest.
Well, you also meet an older person there that used to vacation in Hinterberg when they were younger, and now they've come back and it's like, this is not my Hinterberg. This is I miss being able to go to the bridge and look at the scenery, and now there's these big stores here, and these kids are
#not
these
my
kids on
dungeons.
my lawn. Yeah. So it does go take a thread into the whole tourism thing aspect of the game, which I think that's pretty good.
I think so too. And it's, while it does, as you say, it's a little bit more grounded than a lot of fantasy stories. And one element that it's not grounded at all is the visual design, which is, it does have a very unique visual design. How would you describe it?
Yeah, and I suspect that it's partially because of limitations, because this is an indie game. but it's it definitely has the hand drawn look of I don't know if I'd compare it to Wind Waker, but possibly it looks
A
very
little
hand
bit,
drawn.
yeah.
Yeah, it looks very hand drawn. And that's true for the entire for all of it, for the characters and the environment. But I guess the most impressive thing, visually is when you go into the dungeons and like the color palette just kind of switches to something really weird and something unnatural. There's in the puzzles that you do in the dungeons, you're like moving around jelly blocks and things like that, and it I wouldn't say that this is like particularly creepy, but there's something that's off about it, and there's something that's off about so many aspects of the game. The
Mhm.
monsters also, for instance, there's one monster that's just like a person with a goat mask, but they've got extra long limbs, and the it digs its head into the ground so that it can pop up somewhere else and attack you, which is kind of bizarre looking. um, so it has a little bit of a slightly creepy vibe to probably for the purpose of drawing you in and making it feel like it's something weird. It's not just you're not fighting normal people. You're fighting these weird monsters in these dungeons. So
Aside from the visual style, which, as you say, is quite cartoony and it tends to swing back and forth between realism and surrealism, I believe one of your critiques, though, is essentially the animation. Like, it clearly they were saving some cash on the animation, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it is something that stood out to you a little bit.
yeah, and that's mostly like not in combat, like mostly during the stuff like cutscenes and stuff. You'll notice that the characters all have the same walking motion, and the animation isn't. Yeah, it's not great. It's kind of it's just kind of simple. Um, like I think in combat it kind of makes up for it because there's a lot going on visually. A lot of your attacks are pretty spectacular visually. Um, so there's there are in the action segments it kind of has enough stuff to distract you from noticing that the simplicity of the animations, but yeah, it's more in those slower moments that it's more noticeable, which is fine. It's not a big deal, because I mean, you go into this, knowing that it is an indie game, and it's doing a lot. It's doing a lot, for an indie game, like building these giant worlds and stuff.
Oh, it sounds like it's punching way above its weight.
Yeah, so that's if that I feel like that's a corner that you can cut. That's not gonna
Hmm.
it's not a big deal, right?
Yeah. The other aspect, I guess, that I'm vaguely curious about would be the sound presentation in terms of the music and sound effects and things like that. I read that it's fine, like it's just
Yeah.
it works, but
I mean, like if you played games that are set in like a modern setting, you've probably heard music that sounds like this before. It kind of is the typical sort of Euro kind of trancey sort of music. um, I'm not I'm not
okay.
huge into the electronic music world, but I think that might be how you describe it. So it's very
Hmm.
very just kind of atmospheric sort of music that doesn't have there's no real hook to it or anything. It's just kind of
Ambient.
it's immersing you in this world. So it does its job. It's just I
It
wouldn't
does the job.
I wouldn't sit and listen to the soundtrack. I don't think probably.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that this game sounds like something that, especially Zelda fans, maybe folks who are looking at who love Persona games, like its inspirations are seemingly are on its sleeve, but at the same time, it seems to do something new with those inspirations. Uh, you gave it an 83, which I must repeat is a very good score. Uh, because some people don't believe it is, but it is a very, very good score. Uh, it sounds like you really had a good time here.
Yeah, so I enjoyed the game for sure. You know, it, I don't I don't want to get too much into how the sausage is made, but like and in my opinion, not everything is 100 game potential, 100 score potential, and that's
No, it's
okay.
not.
Like it doesn't have to be. Like, I'm not going to say that if you haven't played Breath of the Wild that you should just say forget it and play Dungeons of Hinterberg, because it's just I guess it depends what kind of experience you want, but
Mhm.
it's not on that epic level of game, but it's also a very good game in its own right. So I enjoyed Dungeons of Hinterberg a lot. I really liked the homages to other video games that are, I guess, probably considered retro now that I I probably didn't consider retro because I guess I'm getting old. But
Mhm.
so um, but yeah, I enjoyed so much of what the game was trying to do, the world, the dungeons. I think the combat starts a little basic, but it gets better as the game goes on. It does a lot of things right, and so if you're, maybe you've got your post Tears of the Kingdom hangover, maybe this is something you can do in the meantime. You'll definitely finish it before the next Zelda comes out. So
I believe that we predict that the next Zelda will be announced but not come out within the next 4 years. So hopefully that is true.
of course, minus the one coming out in September.
Yes,
But that's the different. If
that's
you're
a
waiting for
different
another,
ball game. That's it.
I should say, if you're waiting for another 3D Zelda, then this might be something to hold you
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. Well, I like the fact that it references, as you say, retro games. Let's pivot a little bit here and let's talk about a game that all of us here would consider a retro game, because we are all apparently very, very old, and that is Vay, Vay. Now, this is an interesting game, and I'll tell you why. In fact, we sort of have. I don't want to a sort of connection to it here at RPG Fan. So Vay was first released in Japan on the Sega CD in 1993. And then in 1994, Working Designs, famously Working Designs that worked on the Lunar series, localized it and released it in North America. However, this version of the game included some very altered character names and, shall we say, a sense of humor that was not necessarily present in the original Japanese release. And again, this is consistent with their localizations of other RPGs, including the Lunar series. They was, at the time, considered a bit of a showcase for the Sega CD. It included, obviously, CD quality audio, and the big thing, which I recall being a big deal in video game magazines at the time, were anime cutscenes. However, it was also tremendously overshadowed by more popular titles such as Lunar, the Silver Star, which also featured CD quality audio and some very memorable anime cutscenes. The game sort of fell into obscurity the Sega CD is already sort of obscure at this point, but this game fell into obscurity and it became a very rare collector's item. However, in 2008, back when iOS devices and the App Store were riding high and basically throw whatever you can on there and earn a buck, they released a company released a port of Vay for it, and it is a upgrade of the original game, includes a couple of upgraded features, better localization, and recently the updated version of Vay has been released for modern platforms. That includes PC via Steam. So it's a retro game, and some of us have some experience with it. Neal, you mentioned early on in the review that you are very surprised to see it revived in 2004. Why is that?
Indeed, I am. In fact, even back when Somoga released the 2008 port for it, I was completely surprised because Vay, or some people pronounce it Vi because of how the Japanese kana is written. I usually said Vay because when I see Vay, I immediately pronounce it like Bay or something.
Yeah, Bay sounds like a Vay leaf.
Yeah. Although Vi reminds me of Guitar Wizard Steve Vai, so valid as well. But coming back to the question at hand, it was, as you said, the game was very much overshadowed by the console and localization company darling Lunar.
Hmm.
I mean, that was the dominant that was a dominant RPG on Sega CD, and that was the one Working Designs did a whole bunch of remakes for multiple platforms.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've always viewed Vey as kind of the younger, not quite as successful little brother of the Lunar series, like very similar in many ways, but never quite broke through.
Yeah, or that kind of quirky cousin.
Yeah, the quirky cousin. The case in point, RPG Fan didn't emerge from a site called VeyNet.
Exactly. So the fact that it made an appearance back then, and I'll admit the 2008 mobile port of it was just a hot mess in every aspect.
So many iOS apps and games in 2008 were just a disaster.
So the fact that not only was it given the kind of renovation you almost see on like an HGTV show, it's like Somaga took the 2008 version down to the studs and just built it back up for 2024. I'm like, wait, what? This is happening? I didn't think this game even had legs anymore, yet here it is, and it's, in my opinion, my favorite version of the game.
Yeah, it sounds like your reaction is very much like, really? I mean, great, but really?
Pretty much, because outside of a very specific niche fan base, I'm not sure who outside of that would be as interested in the game, because as far as it's concerned, it is as, traditional a turn-based JRPG as you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of the 16-bit games at the time, notably games like, say, Phantasy Star 2 for the Genesis or Mega Drive, while it does have some plot elements that come out of nowhere and have an emotional impact, it wasn't a very story-driven RPG.
It was innovative in the sense that there were, well, anime cutscenes is basically what sort of set everything apart on the Sega CD. But otherwise, many of the games that were released on Sega CD were very, very similar to games that could be released on the Genesis, just with somewhat better sound and occasionally bells and whistles. But like the game, if gun to my head, if you cook out the anime cutscenes and the CD quality sound, it looks like a 1993, 1994 Sega Genesis game.
Yeah, albeit with maybe some brighter colors and sharper lines.
One of the things that is interesting about this particular game, like you said, they took it down to the studs and they rebuilt it, but not to the same extent as, well, again, say Lunar the Silver Star. Lunar Silver Star has, has 4 different versions of the game that are complete remakes of each other. There were a series of 4 retro encounter episodes, or there was a retro encounter episode a couple of months ago now, that was focused on just that. This isn't a full-on remake like the many versions of Lunar. This is the original version. It just has new bells and whistles and quality of life features added to the game, right?
That is very much correct, because Somaga is not a big company with a big budget or anything, but what they were able to do with what I assume were limited resources to make Vey enjoyable and playable for a current day audience, and including those like me who have history with that era of RPGs, but don't have the patience for like the ultra grindiness and everything. I think they did a pretty good job with it. And one thing to note is that, obviously, because it would probably be stupid expensive to get the rights to the Working Design script, the localization of this version is completely different. It's very much closer to the Japanese version. For example, the main character's name is Heidelger, not Sandor. And what's also nice is you can choose to have the Japanese voice track for the cutscenes.
Oh, that is nice.
Yeah.
One of the things, I mean, there's a bunch. One of the nice things whenever someone properly re-releases an RPG, a classic retro RPG with quality of life features, one of the most popular ones is the ability to turn off random encounters, because especially in some of these earlier games, random encounters were insane. There were so many of them that it dramatically disrupted the overall just the feeling of playing the game. Did you turn them off for your run? Because I know you can.
You know what? I did and I didn't.
Okay.
Because I often did turn off the random encounters, say in situations when my party was low on health and low on supplies and needed to just hightail it back to town to heal or restock.
Mm-hmm.
However, keeping random encounters off the whole game is not a good idea, because then you'll lack the experience and money to do, well, anything.
Mm-hmm.
However, this is where I would use this along with some of the other quality of life features. For example, there's 2 difficulty levels, normal and hard, and there's adjustable multipliers to scale how much experience and money you get. So I would use those to ease the grind, really. And it would allow me to even just turn off the random encounters as and when I needed to, if I felt, okay, I got enough money and experience, I think I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
So while no, you cannot play the game completely without random encounters, and I'm sure it would probably be like prohibitively expensive to reprogram the entire game from the ground up to, cut the encounter rate in half and then, change the amounts of experience you're given. The fact that I had options to play around with it and make a more streamlined experience was pretty nice, actually.
Yeah, I think that a lot of game companies in the last few years have really been playing around with that idea of you do need a certain number of battles just to get to a level of experience where you can face the boss, where you can continue with the game. I believe that Cthulhu Saves the World and other games by that studio, they give you, okay, here's the number of encounters that you need to complete in this dungeon to get to that level. And then you can continue to fight after that if you really want to, but after that you don't need to. But they clearly didn't want to reinvent the game. They wanted to release the game as it is. But by adding these quality of life features, they probably made it considerably easier and less time consuming to get through. I imagine walking speed is another one, because my God, these characters walk slow in some of these games.
Yep, the default walking speed is much faster now, but and in fact, I never had to use the dash feature, because the few times I tried dashing, he would dash so fast, I completely lost control.
Yeah, I like to think about this as the sprint shoes conundrum in Final Fantasy VI, where the sprint shoes were like a necessary relic in the original version of the game just so you didn't pull your hair out. But nowadays, because they do have the sprint function, if you put the sprint shoes on and then you sprint, your character is just like, vroom!
Yeah, but yeah, right. And coming back to the point about, the experience and all, the money multiplier was really great to have in this version of Vi as well, simply because when you go to the next town, the equipment you need is pretty expensive. So even in the original version, not only were you grinding like crazy for experience to be able to fight the bosses and level up the characters who join you, because they join you at fixed levels, but also grinding
that old chestnut.
but yeah, grinding for enough money to, buy the next best sword.
Yeah, I mean, that was a classic old a classical JRPG problem where you would spend like a good couple of hours grinding your character to level 20, and then you go to the next town and they're like, our greatest warrior will help you. They are so strong. And then they join and they'd be like at level 7. You'd be like, oh, good. You are going to be very helpful, I can tell. The game itself is, again, bog standard JRPG. It uses it's very traditional, right down to the game story, character development and dialogue, and of course the turn-based combat. What is the combat like here? I mean, it's turn-based, but is there anything that separates it, or is it pretty standard fight magic items?
It's your bog standard fight magic items.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
it's junk. It's good. It's junk food. It's tasty.
Yeah. It's just that instead of the commands being in words, they're in icons.
Okay.
And again, completely self-explanatory.
Yep. I do not imagine, looking at this screenshot, I do not imagine that if someone threw a controller to me randomly in the middle of the game and I had not seen anything from this game previously, I would be able to navigate a combat, a fight very easily.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. One of the things, this is actually kind of funny, and if you've never played the game before or even heard of it before, this might sound interesting. One of the things that you were extremely passionate about, and you mentioned inside our the RPG fan Slack, was the farting fairies. Now, this was an infamous localization addition to the original game. I think it was a prime example of Working Design's attempts at humor falling flat. You are delighted that the farting fairies are gone.
Oh my goodness, that farting fairy nonsense. Not only did I feel like it added absolutely nothing to the story or anything, but it was just a gimmick where, that added in where it's where if you didn't know about it, you get an instant game over, and then you have to buy gas masks in the town to circumvent that. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? This was never in the Japanese version. What is this nonsense doing here? And the toilet humor, in my opinion, does not fit Vay's vibe at all. It's the game's mood is very earnest. This, and the protagonist is a very serious-minded guy as well. And like, one of the things I liked in the new version was some of the NPC dialogue, for example, in a fishing village where they're complaining about the economy because the evil empire has commandeered their waterways, and they feel like them and their village and their livelihood is getting squeezed out by them. So I feel like that's the vibe of Vay, that you really felt like in each town, these people were getting downtrodden by the empire. So it made the stakes of the quest feel a lot more genuine. Yes, there were a few attempts at the lowbrow humor in the new localization, as kind of a nod to Working Designs, but I didn't think they worked at all.
Yeah. It's that kind of humor really is a hit and miss situation, and it sounds like the original version didn't hit properly. It just didn't fit stylistically with the game. So I am glad that they've removed the farting fairies. If I had not known anything about the farting fairies prior to this conversation, you said they removed the farting fairies, my response would be, oh, good. I'm glad that there are no farting fairies in this game, because that sounds silly, and not funny silly, in like a very juvenile sort of silliness. I suppose that, as I mentioned earlier, the selling point for this game, primarily back in the early 90s, would have been the anime cutscenes. Because, oh my god, anime cutscenes in a video game? How is that even possible? Back then, it would have been mind-blowing. How do the anime cutscenes hold up today as compared to when they were first introduced?
Because the cutscenes have not been, like, restored or like given the HD treatment or anything, they definitely look a bit choppy and grainy. It's one of those things where it looks dated now, but would have been really impressive back then.
Yeah, this is I would not call this sharp. This is, I mean, this doesn't even look like it's 480p. This is 240p. But that doesn't really matter because the game is what it is. It's they clearly didn't have the budget to do full remasters. And the anime cutscenes on the Sega CD, well, there were anime cutscenes. They were very dissimilar to what we would consider to be anime cutscenes today. Like, I remember my mind-blowing moment was seeing anime cutscenes with Lunar Silver Star Story Complete. And those were completely new. They were completely redone. They were actually anime, whereas the cutscenes in the original the Silver Star were a lot more primitive, shall we say. So I'm excited by the fact that they actually kept that true to the original rather than trying to upgrade it, or worse, do a horrible VR upscale sort of thing, which just looks wrong and weird.
Yeah, like again, I don't think they look bad at all.
No, I don't. I mean, I'm looking at some screenshots here. They look fine. I know I keep comparing this to Lunar for obvious reasons, but one of the reasons why people love Lunar to this day, and not just Silver Star, but also the original, is because of the music. Lunar had a ridiculously banging soundtrack, and still does. But what's the music like here? It doesn't seem like they were quite as focused on the soundtrack as the Lunar series did, even though it did feature CD quality sound, which was a massive selling point at the time.
Yeah. The music, it's decent, but there's just not enough of it. It's like there's only like one town theme, one dungeon theme, one castle theme, and just hearing a lot of those same pieces of music over and over got tiring over the long haul. Dig this. The final dungeon didn't even have its own unique theme. It recycled a piece of music from the beginning of the game.
That's a little disappointing.
Yeah, I mean, but on a positive note, in this new version, the music loops a lot more smoothly, because even in the original version, when the music would end, there would be a pause before it starts looping again. So here, it loops more smoothly. But yeah, again, the music itself isn't bad, but there just isn't enough of it. It lacked variety. I wanted more. I wanted multiple town themes. I wanted multiple dungeon themes. I wanted more.
Yeah. Well, you're a music guy. So clearly, yeah, I mean, music for you is a core experience. But it does sound like they've managed to fix some of the core issues with the original version, including the it's so funny because they brag about how it offers CD quality sound, and it's like they're literally CD tracks, so game loops are a little bit more awkward than they would be in an SNES or Genesis game where the songs just end. It sounds like they fixed that here.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I wanted to, just before we move on to our discussion question, which is going to be a real quick discussion question today. I came up with one, and it's with your help, and it's just dumb fun. But you mentioned that you consider this to be your favorite version of They, and it expertly balances nostalgia with some modern quality of life features. Why do you feel that this is your favorite version, even with the imperfections and problems?
Well, for the reasons you said, that it blends the nostalgia with the quality of life features to offer a rosy nostalgia trip, plus it doesn't have the goofy and, in my opinion, stupid lowbrow toilet humor of the Working Designs version. It doesn't have that. So I'm happy about that, because it is a more serious-minded game. And I also like that, unlike the Working Designs version where they tinkered with, boss stats and everything, making a mid-game boss, the Wind Elemental, damn near impossible, he's beatable now. Even if I were to face him with the hard difficulty level, I could still beat him. So yeah, definitely. And so yeah, that plus, the increased walking speed and things like that. Yeah, definitely, in my opinion, best version of the game.
Neat. Well, I think that we're going to move on to the discussion question now, and it's going to be a good old-fashioned silly one, because after last week and talking about all these predictions and things like that and news and talking, what do you think's going to happen in the future? I don't want to know what's going to happen in the future. I want to know something silly. So here's the question, based off Dungeons of Hinterberg and our conversation. If you could take a vacation in any RPG world, where would you go? And actually, I'm going to change this a little bit just because open it up a little bit. If you could take a vacation in any video game world, any setting of a video game, what would be the video game world you'd go to?
Dungeons of Hinterberg. No.
Oh, yes, it's
no. No, I'm gonna come up with something better than that. I don't love the game, but Final Fantasy 15's Eos is definitely something that draws me to it. The fact that maybe it's because you get to go fishing. You essentially get to go deep sea fishing, and I don't know. It feels like there's I love the kind of the combination of kind of traditional Final Fantasy tropes in like a somewhat modern environment. And there's so many. I mean, it's it's such a like diverse landscape and all that. And obviously, if Ignis would be my cook, that'd be great too. Like, food's an important part of vacation. So, so I would say Final Fantasy 15. Although I'm coming to notice that now whenever I see like mountainous landscapes in video games, like I'm like it just looks like Nevada. So, it's cool,
Yeah.
but like I can also just kind of go outside the city and see that. but yeah, love Eos, love wandering around Eos. So
Cool. Neal?
I need to give a shout out to the town of Altamira in Tales of Symphonia, because that town reminded me of some popular Jersey Shore towns like Wildwood. And again, I'm from New Jersey, and I've had some good memories, memorable summers with friends going down the shore. So that, and like the popular Jersey Shore town of Wildwood, Altamira, I mean, it is a bit gaudy, a bit touristy, can be kind of crowded, which Altamira usually was, but the in-game circumstances were diminishing the crowds. But it was a very popular destination. Like for me, hanging out with friends in Wildwood, going up and down the boardwalk, doing some of the touristy stuff. In fact, the little like elemental railway they use in Altamira to get from like the main beach hub to the amusement park and all reminded me a bit of the tram cars in Wildwood. The big Ferris wheel in Altamira's amusement park reminded me of the big Ferris wheel in Wildwood's Maury's Piers amusement park. And okay, I'll admit, places like Altamira aren't necessarily my vibe these days because I've gotten older, and I, prefer a smaller, quieter beach or shore town. But yeah, when I first visited Altamira in Tales of Symphonia, I definitely got a Jersey Shore vibe from it. So, yeah.
Let me see here. What is mine? Okay, for me, I actually had a couple of thoughts. My first one was actually Like a Dragon, but then I was like, I could just go to Japan. Like, it's not like that's a fictional video game world. I could just go to Japan and like visit all of the places in the game. So that I don't really want to count that. And then my second thought was actually the Tri-Island area in Monkey Island, because I love the Monkey Island games. But similarly, I was like, I don't like being on boats and I don't like sand. Like, why the hell would I want to go? I could just go to the Caribbean. It would be fine. So I picked a fictional place, and that would be, because I am spoiled and I want to be comfortable, Crossworlds from the game Crosscode. So in Crosscode, the entire game takes place in a real-world environment. It's a moon that has been terraformed and designed to be the world of Crossworlds. And instead of visiting it as a human being, you go into a virtual reality machine essentially, and an avatar is sent to this world. And this avatar can feel everything, can exist on this world, but you can't get hurt. It's impossible. You can regenerate whenever you want. It's impossible, and it sounds like it's a really cool place to be. If you love RPGs and you love RPG worlds, then Cross Worlds and this moon seems like it would be an ideal scenario to go to, just because it is a perfect mix of fantasy and science fiction and comfort. And the world of I really like Crosscode. The world of Crosscode is something that I wish they would delve into a little bit more, because I think it's really, really a neat place, and it would be a great place to go on vacation.
Being able to regenerate really opens up the possibilities for vacations.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? You want to go mountain climbing?
Yeah.
Safety equipment. Whee!
Heck, I would just want to be able to have one night at the inn completely cure like a hangover.
Oh, geez, yeah. The one night, here's my 30 gold. Like, the RPG protagonists never have insomnia unless the story demands it, because, I don't know, Edward needs to play the harp and get attacked by a monster. Then of course, yes, you do have insomnia. But otherwise, or Cecil getting attacked by Baron guards. But otherwise, you sleep great. You always sleep great. I can think, actually, now that I've said that, I can think about several other occasions where, unless there's a giant fire of a mansion in town, and if your name is Shadow. Anyway, so now that I am just riffing off insomnia and RPGs, how about we wrap this up? So if you were looking for a way to support us here at RPG Fan, we've opened up a store, and you can find it at www.rpgfan.com/shop. Lots of things in there, including mugs, t-shirts. Well, we have tons of really, really cool merch. And we also have the collaboration with Hyperplay RPG, the RPG Fan Review Card Collection. It's a showcase of nearly 300 of our review cards, as you can see on Instagram regularly. And I love this book. It's on my shelf. 2 copies are on my shelf, actually. I just get a kick out of seeing my name in print. It's fun. Feels very 1990s video game magazine. And these are just really, really great little cards that you can flip through in a much more accessible way, I guess you could say, than having to go to the website. And there's little blurbs, little quick hits, and I just love it. It's such a cool book. There are other ways to support us here at RPG Fan, including visiting all of our podcasts. So you are listening to Random Encounter. I've mentioned some of the episodes that we've done recently, but I'll mention them again real quick. Last week was episode 300. Make sure you listen to that one before episode 400 and 4 years from now. Just give you a heads up. And before that, we did an episode focusing on Monster Hunter and some of the news out of the Nintendo Direct. And before that, it was the Not E3 episode, where that was a marathon, as Not E3 week always is a marathon. It really does take a lot out of you, and I think that we did a pretty good job of summarizing all of the news that was within our coverage there. But we are not the only podcast here at RPG Fan. We also have Retro Encounter. So last week's Retro Encounter was Retro 426, which was Dark Souls Part 2. Week before that, of course, was Dark Souls Part 1. So if you love Dark Souls, absolutely give those a listen. And remember, Retro comes out every single week on Thursdays. So yeah, that's a great time. You could also check out our other podcast, which is Rhythm Encounter. It's our music podcast. So the last episode from last week was Retro 139, which was indie RPG music. So that, of course, was focusing on the music of indie RPGs. And
I was on that one.
You were on that one? How'd it go?
Oh, it was so much fun.
Awesome. And then next week, we are going to be having one that is focused on the best DS RPG music. So if you are of that generation that grew up playing the DS, you might hear some of your favorite tracks on there. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can do so by firing us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I would love to hear from you. If you have any suggestions, any discussion questions, silly ones are great, like the one we did this week. They're fun. Just fire me off a message. I'd love to hear it. And if you'd like to get in contact with me directly, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. You can also find me on Mastodon at johnlogan@mastodon.social. I'm not the only person on here with a social presence online. Abe, where can we find you?
Best places on Instagram. It's just Abe Kobylanski.
Cool. And Neal?
My email is nealch@rpgfan.com. That's NEALCH. And I'm also Neal CH RPG Fan on the Discord.
Cool. If you enjoyed this podcast, I invite you to share it with your friends to help us get the word out there. And you could also rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. Before I go, I would really just like to thank Abe, Neal. Thank you so much for joining me on today's show, for playing through these games, for giving us these reviews. I appreciate you regardless, but I really appreciate when you give me the time and you come onto the episode and you spend it and just chatting about stuff. It's such a good time. So thank you both.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, love being here. Love being here.
Of course.
Choose.
Of course. And to everyone out there, I want to thank you for joining us as well. And to everybody listening, whatever you're playing, have fun.